Our big focus, Qatar has released 8 Indian Navy veterans who were sentenced to death on espionage charges. 7 of the 8 former Indian Navy personnel have now returned to India. The release of the Indian Navy veterans and freeing them of espionage charges marks a significant diplomatic breakthrough between India and Qatar. This is a matter of massive celebration and victory for India. The Indian Navy veterans were accused of spying for Israel through India, and Qatar did not confirm the charges against them. Their death sentence handed down in October was dropped in December. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who personally supervised all developments in this case, will visit Qatar on the 14th of February to hold talks with its ruler, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. Foreign Secretary Vinay Mohan Kwatra said this earlier today afternoon. And of course, many are wondering as to what made Qatar change its stand. Joining us at this point is Ambassador Bhashpati Mukherjee, former diplomat. We also have Vaya Lavad, senior journalist, joining us live. Madhav Nalapat, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, is live with us. Jordan Cope, Qatari fellow, MEF, also is with us live. Ambassador Mukherjee, let me begin with you first. What do you believe achieved this breakthrough and secured the release of these veterans?
Well, clearly, the first breakthrough must have occurred when our Prime Minister met the Qatari head of state, and from the body language, it was clear that it was a very good meeting. I have just returned from Goa from the India Energy Week, where we signed a huge deal with RasGas. The Qatari minister was there. PM had gone to inaugurate it. There were very intense talks between the Qatari delegation and our delegation, between our Minister of Petroleum and his Qatari counterpart. There again, it was very clear from the bonhomie and the goodwill. I myself spoke to some of the Qatari delegates who were there, that the bilateral relationship for both countries was far too important to allow such an issue to muddy it, maybe for years. Moreover, it had been informally ascertained that usually the head of state of Qatar exercises his pardon just before Ramadan. So in any case, there had been a reprieve on the death penalty. It was a question of getting them back. And this has happened due to quiet diplomacy behind the scenes, which is actually the way such things are worked out. It is a matter of rejoicing. And it also shows that our Prime Minister has very effectively, along with our External Affairs Minister and all the other concerned ministers, been very effective in being able to get this huge issue home. We are rejoicing, all of us as a nation, for this great moment, and we are grateful to the government of Qatar for allowing these very senior veterans to come back to their families who've been so anxiously waiting and counting the hours for them to get back. So, in my opinion, what paid off, if you ask me, was quiet diplomacy, no public pressure, understanding on both sides, and huge understanding between our Prime Minister and the head of state of Qatar, to whom I think as a nation we are grateful that he understood our sentiments and let our veterans go.
Vailavad, how do you view, how this entire operation to secure the release panned out over the weeks, and also what the answer to that question is, which many are speculating on, what made Qatar change its stand?
Well, I fully agree with Ambassador Mukherjee on this issues, because it is a very sensitive topic to talk about it, because both sides have maintained silence and secrecy of dealing with these issues because of the sensitivity. And Qatar laws are very strict, especially in terms of espionage, and that's why they have always given the death sentence. And take also in consideration that a country like Qatar is a small population, where you are having also double the number of the population are the Indian expats. There are more than 800,000 Indian in Qatar. So there is a huge community there working in Qatar. Therefore, there has to be not only the Indian, but there are a diaspora there also working from different countries. So Qatar is very sensitive, and also hosting the largest military base of the United States there. So this is issues that they cannot let it go like this. So therefore, they kept a strict laws laws in the country and vigilance regarding any sort of things affecting the national interest of the nation. Having said that, I said that Qatar also felt that the case is very sensitive because of the siege of Qatar during the rift with Saudi Arabia, where Saudi Emirates and the Egyptians have besieged Qatar from all the sides. So they felt that they wanted to also develop or buy some sort of warships to protect themselves. And then they've used this. So India, these Indians have been working with the Italian company, working in Qatar or Al Dahra, where there are 85 Indian actually in that company, not only them. So they must have had some information, data, intelligence. And I think Tel Aviv should also step in to explain its role, the intelligence input to if it has been there seriously. So Qatar have pardoned them because of definitely the interference of the Prime Minister. The South Bloc have done the job, and we have been monitoring and following the story ever since the sentence of these Indians were declared, and after they have also reduced their sentence. So I think that was a quite diplomacy have paid off well.
Absolutely. Professor Nalapat, diplomacy, personal intervention at the top, all of this has paid off. And do you see perhaps that relationship going forward this week when the PM visits Qatar himself?
Well, I'd like to say that I would fully endorse what has been said by the previous two discussants, and definitely the personal diplomacy between Prime Minister Modi and the Amir of Qatar, Sheikh Hamad, has definitely been the reason why these individuals have come back. Now, what was the reason for the case in the first place? As has correctly been said by Dr. Awad, there are about 800,000 Indians working there. And the fact of the matter is that the two countries in particular would like to replace them with people from Pakistan. One is Pakistan itself, and the other is China. So it's quite likely that some fake information was manufactured. And I think, the Chinese are very good at manufacturing fake information and using AI, etc. for that. And as a consequence, these individuals were brought under suspicion and sent to prison. Now, this kind of thing happens, unfortunately. And the intention was to ensure that there is a downscaling of Indians among the expat community in Qatar and a replacement by Pakistanis. And we all know, whether it's in terms of productivity or in terms of law and order issues, the Indian who are there working in the Gulf are miles and miles ahead of the Pakistanis, who have got major problems regarding productivity and law and order. So obviously it was that, and very clearly it was personal diplomacy on the part of Prime Minister Modi. You'll recall that when the Ukraine war started, India was able to retrieve all its students, not to mention also Arab students, Pakistani students, Bangladeshi students, all kinds of students from the Ukraine when the territory is under attack, because of the very good relationship that the Prime Minister had with President Putin, as well as the strong relationship he has had with Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine. The personal relationships have been built up by the Prime Minister across the board in so many different countries. And I think this personal relationship that he has had with the Amir of Qatar was decisive in ensuring that these individuals, these members, the former members of very noble service, be returned home in safety. And I salute the Amir of Qatar, His Highness, for the decision that he took on the request of the Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi. I would say that the two leaders have shown that they can work together, and Qatar has shown that it can be a reliable partner of India. I think that's a very welcome development.
Okay. Let me, in fact, quickly also bring in Jordan Cope into the discussion. Jordan, what's the perspective, where you are on what actually led to this breakthrough by India, and the sense, of course, on how this case has panned out in Qatar?
Of course, and first of all, thank you for having me. I think it's very important to exercise some serious restraint when we go into what Qatar's motives are ultimately behind this. because at the end of the day, the 8 former naval Indian officers didn't have their charges publicly revealed. The circumstances of their case weren't publicly revealed. And on top of that, neither were the circumstances of their release. So there's a lot that we don't know, and this is all purely speculation. But it should be noted that a few months prior to their arrest in August of 2022, there was a spat between India and Qatar concerning Nupur Sharma, a BJP spokesperson. So who knows whether tensions between India and Qatar might have ultimately motivated the detaining of those naval officers. But it should be noted that Qatar lacks due process, and according to Freedom House, ranks 1 out of 4 for their due process and how they exercise that in their judicial system, which is not transparent whatsoever. And so there's a lot of mounting pressure on Qatar right now due to the fact that it has maintained a mediator role in the hostage situation between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. And many are arguing that Qatar isn't doing enough to pressure Hamas to release the hostages, given that it harbors it within its own soil, funds them, and regularly displays Hamas propaganda on its state-sponsored Al Jazeera network. So it's a bit hard to determine why Qatar ultimately released these naval officers. It commuted their sentences down from the death penalty, seeming to suggest that their sentencing wasn't worthy and probably their charges were spurious. And then on top of that, they've now released them after 22 months. So there seems to have been perhaps a political motive behind their detainment, because if they really were spies, perhaps Qatar wanted to have gotten more information out of them. But what's also interesting is a few weeks ago, Modi ultimately released a call for a ceasefire in Gaza and called for the creation of a Palestinian state. So there's a lot happening behind the scenes that we're not aware of. And perhaps those calls regarding Gaza and the Palestinian cause, which is very near and dear to the heart of the Qataris, might have ultimately motivated the shift in relations. But again, this is all pure speculation. And because we don't know the conditions of the release, the conditions of the charges, and the details of why they were ascertained, there's just simply a lot we don't know.
Yes, but what we do know is that, of course, perhaps there was a personal intervention at the top. We do know that Prime Minister Modi did meet with, his Qatari counterpart recently. And what do you believe, Jordan, is the current state of India-Qatar relations? And where do they head henceforth? I'll just get you to react, Ambassador Mukherjee. Just let Jordan quickly answer that. Then I'll come to you. Because, Jordan, also there's a visit, interestingly, by the PM to Qatar coming up just this week on the 14th, in fact.
Right. And I do think Prime Minister Modi does deserve some credit. At the end of the day, his responsibility is to his own people. And I do think it is a success to Modi for being able to get the hostages released.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, we have to ask, why were the hostages there to begin with? And assuming the charges were spurious and unwarranted, it wouldn't have been professional probably for Indian governance at the top level to have had any other response than to ultimately praise Qatar at the end of the day. The Emir had the power from day one to get these former naval officers freed. It took 22 months. So something seemed to have happened behind the scenes. There were tensions between India and Qatar when these former naval officers were detained, and it took 22 months too long to get them freed. And so I think ultimately ties between India and Qatar are a little bit hesitant, a little bit skeptical, but ultimately having at the top level and in the public eye to display ties of friendship to have forged this deal to get them returned home, assuming that there might have been a deal. Again, this is all speculation, and every single one of us in this panel are commenting on details that are not publicly available, unless they have some insider information they would like to share.
Okay. Yes, Ambassador Mukherjee.
I would first of all like to clarify for our guest who's here that India has always been committed to a Palestinian state. That is not something that Prime Minister Modi invented because our Navy veterans were under death penalty. It has been our consistent position that we believe in a Palestinian state. That's the first clarification I wanted to make. The second clarification is that Nupur Sharma, or whatever she said, had got nothing at all to do with the detention of the Navy veterans. The dates don't coincide. When the veterans were arrested, there was some talk that their boss, who was Omani, who was arrested, was allowed to go. There was some talk that there was some rumors that they were supposed to be spying for Israel, but there were no charges brought. And as you rightly pointed out, it was in the realm of speculation. On the other hand, I would like to say that there are a very large number of Indians who work in Qatar, who keep the economy going, who have an excellent relationship, regardless of religion. They have been very well treated by the Qataris. We have just signed a huge deal in Goa with RasGas, which will give India energy security, thanks to Qatar, for the next 50 years. So we have a resilient economic relationship with Qatar, which has nothing to do with Qatar's internal politics, or whether it is hosting Hamas, or whether it should do more to pressure Israel or not. We have our own bilateral excellent relationship with Israel, and we have been one of the first countries to recognize Palestine, to give them an embassy in Delhi, and to talk about a Palestinian state. That is, our relationship is based on core national interests. The release of the hostages, thanks to the bonhomie between the Emir of Qatar and our Prime Minister, reflects the core national interests of both countries, which would have been badly disrupted if they were executed or kept in indefinite detention. That is what I wanted to say.
Yes, Jordan.
May I respond to this?
Yes, please, Jordan.
I would first like to say that indeed, it is well known that India has perceived a future Palestinian state as part of its policy, but the timing right now, at this very sensitive time, to reiterate that commitment is certainly one that could have ultimately appealed to the ears of Qatar. The one thing that I'll strongly disagree with ultimately is that the treatment of migrant workers in Qatar has been favorable. And if you were paying attention to the development up until the 2022 World Cup, you surely would have been aware of the amount of migrant worker deaths, the extortionate number of migrant worker deaths that had ultimately continued to accumulate all the way up until the beginning whistle of the first World Cup match. To say that migrant workers in Qatar have been treated well over the years is a ridiculous claim. The fact that they are subjected to the kafala system, which has been compared to modern day slavery. So you seem very quick to praise Qatar, to give it all the praises that it can afford. But at the end of the day, these former naval officers would not have been in Qatari detainment, but for these charges that weren't made readily available to the public, but for the details of the court order that ultimately had them sentenced to death. This was a big political scandal. And to reduce it and to thank the government of Qatar for taking members of the Indian, the former members of the Indian Navy who were training Qataris at the time. And we don't even know whether they were actually spying or not. But what we do know is recently there's been a lot happening behind the scenes. We're all here to speculate as to what might have motivated the release. And we simply don't know. And to, I guess, to proclaim that it certainly could or could not have been something, it's a bit difficult to make this claim at this time.
Ambassador Mukherjee?
I don't agree at all. And moreover, I never said that all migrant workers are well treated. I talked about Indian workers working, and I don't think it's very polite to say that what I said is ridiculous. I have not said anything ridiculous. I have said Indian workers have contributed to the economic development. I have said that thanks to Qatar and the RasGas agreement signed a few days ago in Goa, India has energy security for 50 years. And we, as a sovereign nation, will conduct our foreign relations with Qatar, with Israel, or any other country according to our core national interests. We are not obliged to follow any other country's interests, nor are we obliged to follow any human rights code which Western countries may wish to impose on any other country, be it Qatar or be it India. And I really do feel that what I said was not ridiculous, it was logical, and it came from a diplomat of 40 years of training. Thank you.
May I quickly respond?
Dr. Awad, okay, no. Now this can't become a a point versus counterpoint. I have to just expand the scope of discussion. We must respect each other's point of view. But Dr. Awad, the fact, of course, is that we are expecting the PM to be in Qatar later this week. What do you expect to transpire in that meeting? What do you believe will be on the agenda for the talks? And which way is the India-Qatar relationship headed? I'll leave the last word to you.
I think I echo each word of Ambassador Mukherjee, whatever she said, with due respect, knowing her for the last 30 years. And I know that she is speaking of an Indian consistent foreign policy, which has nothing to do with the treatment, even with the Indian. By the way, Qatar have opened a visa-free for Indian to visit. So if the Indian were mistreated, I don't think they would have been giving that things. And having said that, the Qatari have hosted the football world tournament. It has been one of the most successful one in the world, despite the propaganda from the West. I was in UK those days, and we knew that the media was firing at the Qataris like anything, because they didn't like to be hosted by an Arab nation. But the India-Qatar relation, I think they should learn one lesson from that no one single Indian should be used by any country for espionage against another country, because India actually having the largest expats in the world in the Arab countries, especially in the GCC. You have more than 8 million Indians there with more than $73 billion revenue annually. And you are having also more than 14 million Indians visiting the Gulf. I think these are the lessons we have to keep in mind, that there's cordial relation between India and the Arab countries should be fostered, should be strong, should be friendly. And this sensitivity of these issues, in fact, between India, Doha and New Delhi have been giving you the answer. That's why they kept it secretly, because it has lots of sensitivity and they wanted to solve it amicably. And I think that's the good diplomacy of India, the backdoor diplomacy. And India have been the forefront, fighting not only in Qatar, but in UAE, in many countries, to release all Indians. And that's what the Prime Minister, in fact, showed to the rest of the world, that every Indian is matter for the Indian government.
All right, let's leave it at that. My thanks to all of our guests for joining us on this discussion.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.